Funding for the following presentation is provided by a grant from UConn Extension and is a cooperative effort of UConn Extension and the Risk Management Agency Division of the USDA.
Welcome to Taking Effective Photos of Your Farm. The voice you hear speaking is Molly Deegan, and that's me. I'm the program coordinator at UConn Extension for Put Local on Your Tray, which is a farm-to-school program. And less technically, I am an avid photographer, I'm an artist, you are too, and I'm a supporter of farmers. So happy to be recording this webinar and helping you out on how to take the best photos possible of your farm so you can get people interested in your story. That's my contact info. If you have any questions, I'll show that at the end as well. So the objective of this webinar is to teach you all, the listener, memorable, basic photographic principles. So I had done this presentation in person, and so there's time for conversation on any questions on these photographic principles and camera capabilities that I'll go over, but you can always reach out to me via email and let me know if you have any concerns or any clarifications. And I aim to empower you to treat each photo that you take as a piece of art that has meaning and substance, regardless of what device you're using. So a lot of times we see a photographer with a big fancy camera and we think, there's no way we could possibly take photos that are as fancy and professional looking as someone who has a big camera, when in fact that's not true. You still can take beautiful photos on your smartphone, and these days everyone has a camera at their fingertips, which is new technology. Many years ago, being able to take a photo was advanced technology. Only a few people could really be trained and able to take photos, and now everyone can. So it's really important to understand the principles of a good photo so you can maximize on that technology. So hopefully from that you can go on and take photos that are effective and beautiful to tell the story of your farm and feel confident and just overall become an improved photographer. So even if you're taking photos of anything, of your family, of your friends, to preserve memories that tell a story so that other people can look back at these photos and really understand the nuance of what they're seeing. Okay, I'm back. So we're going to go over the basics of the smartphone camera. Then we're going to go over some photographic principles. Then I'm going to give you the assignment of that it's totally optional, but it's a good way to go out in the world and try some of these principles out in real time. And then in person, we did share it. So maybe you're watching this webinar with someone, or you have someone who you feel comfortable showing these photos with. I always think sharing photos with other people to see what they think of it helps. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So the smartphone camera is small, but it does have a lot of capability. So the way it works is that on your phone you have a camera app, and this is software as opposed to a physical lens that goes on your camera. So just as though you were talking about any other app on your smartphone, the camera is the same way. It's a software program that runs on your device. And then the Photos app is the app that lets you edit photos. So the camera app is the app that lets you physically take the photo. Photos app lets you look at the photos and also gives you a range of basic edits such as orientation, cropping, light adjustment, red eye adjustment, color effects. And if you haven't already noticed, on your smartphone there's a front-facing camera and a back-facing camera. So when people take selfies, that's the front-facing camera. and that has a lower resolution than the back-facing camera, just so you know. And a lot of times people forget to just make sure that that area is clean before they take a photo. And I just want to point that out, that a smartphone camera, it can get dirty easily because we're touching it all day because it's our phone. And so we forget to clean it. But a lot of times just wiping that area, sometimes I like fog it up with my breath and then wipe it with my shirt sleeve to just make sure it's totally clean when I go to take a photo, because even if you don't really notice it when you go to take a photo, it can make things not as crystal clear as they could be. So there's a flash. It can go on, it can go off, and it can be turned to auto so it knows when there's low light and needs to click on. So you'll see that in the upper left-hand corner of your smartphone. If I flip back to this page, you can see where the woman's nail is. If you go over to the little flash button, you can kind of see it where it says auto. So her flash is on auto. So going back to this, it's harder to add in light than to darken up a photo because you risk graininess. So there's a grain to a photo that starts to become apparent when you start to add in light. So I would rather say overexpose rather than underexpose. So make it brighter than you think, because it's easier to make things darker than it is to make things lighter. So sometimes that auxiliary light is totally essential, meaning the flash is important, and it helps you fill in deep shadows. So an app that can help you play with flash that I've read about is called Hipstamatic. It can change the color of flash and style if you want to give more creative results to your photos. I tend to just use the normal flash, but some people like to delve deeper into that. And just explore. That's my tip on that. Then you'll notice touch focus. So when you open up the Photos app on your phone, if you just touch in the middle of the screen or touch where your subject is, you'll notice a small square come in focus, and that focus, or that little box that you're seeing, that's called touch focus. So that's the lens automatically focusing on the subject, and you can change this with your finger. So you can see in the picture to the right of the yellow dill flower, this is in focus while the rest of the background is out of focus because I have touched the button to touch focus and make sure that the yellow flower was completely in focus. Depth of field is also seen in this photo because you can see that the main subject is very apparent. So depth of field means that to isolate the main subject, you want to blur out the background or maybe the foreground to really make sure that the subject is known and clear. And to do this, you definitely need to use touch focus. And then some newer phones even have more sophisticated depth of field capability. If you have a newer iPhone, portrait mode does this. It uses depth of field to make a photo look like it's in portrait mode, which just means it has a strong depth of field, a strong focus on just the person's face. An app for depth of field adjustment is Tada SLR. You can try that if you want, but I would recommend starting just with using that touch focus to the best of your ability. And last but not least, keep it steady. So oftentimes our hands are shaky when we go to take a photo, or they can be, and you can see in this bottom photo of the cow that it's not perfectly in focus, even though it looks fine. It's nothing horribly wrong with this photo, but you can see that like animals, they definitely move around a lot. You want to make sure you can minimize the motion from yourself and your subject as much as possible to get the clearest image. Sometimes I use a makeshift tripod by resting my phone on a chair, on a wall, anywhere that is not my hand, something that's not living and moving, to rest assured that you'll get a clear image. So zoom. So we do want to fill the frame with our subject when we're taking a photo. And sometimes we use zoom to make sure we are filling the frame. But I do want to make you wary of zoom a little bit, because when you start using zoom, you'll notice that you're decreasing the resolution of your photograph the closer you zoom in. You're increasing that graininess, and you can see this from the first top photo to the bottom photo. It's not as clear. It's more grainy in that second photo. So just be mindful of that. So get as close as you can to the subject initially. So, and that only really matters if you're blowing up the photo. So you need to think, what am I doing with this photo? If you're just posting it on a social media site, say you're just Instagramming this photo, that's okay. It's not horrible. It's not horribly grainy. But if I was printing this in, a large format print, I would not want a grainy photo, because you would be able to tell once it was blown up that it was a low resolution photograph. So, and don't get hung up on megapixels. It's the size of the image sensor in a phone, which is very tiny, as well as the image processing software that your phone has. So, like I said, the camera app is an app, it's software, so it also depends on the software your phone has. So lots of times people think megapixels is the only measure of a phone's capability to take photographs, but it is not. Which brings me to high dynamic range, HDR mode. So HDR is a mode on your camera that we go back to this slide, we can see HDR is in the upper left-hand side next to where it says auto on her phone. The next says HDR. You can press that and put your phone in high dynamic range shooting. And so what that means is that it's going to take 3 successive photos, one exposed for the brightest areas, one for the dimmest areas, and then one for the average, and it will combine them together to create one more perfectly balanced and exposed shot. So you want to avoid too much HDR because sometimes it makes things look almost not real, but sometimes it does exactly what you need it to do. So sometimes I'll take a photo in HDR if I can't get, it's for those instances when you can't get everything in balance. Like, for instance, this cherry photo, you can see the upper left-hand corner is overexposed. So HDR would have made this whole photo the correct exposure because it would have blended a photo exposed for the brightest and for the dimmest areas and combined them to make the perfect blend. So just play with that, and I really try this out because it might amaze you how it can tweak a photograph in the way that you need. So this is a photo that was taken in 1938 by Dorothea Lange. It's called Tractored Out, and it was taken with one of the first cameras. And I'm pointing it out to you to show you that what an excellent photo looks like, even if it's of a bleak, empty scene. So what makes a good photograph in 1938 is still what makes a photograph great in 2018, though the technology is much different. Farms are extremely interesting places to take photos, and that was the main subject that Dorothea Lange focused on in particular. She's an inspiration of mine. But what she does so greatly is that she finds the frame for her photo. She draws you in with these lines of the tractor lines, the hills, and then she points you right into this direction of the farmhouse, and she tells a story of what life is like out here on this farm instantly. So this bridges us into talking about photographic principles. So we covered discussing the basics of a smartphone, very basic. And now we're headed into a discussion of photographic principles. So the rule of thirds is the very first principle that you learn as a student of photography. And it simply states an image that should be imagined as divided into 9 equal parts by 2 equally spaced horizontal lines and vertical lines. And your important compositional elements should be placed along these lines or their intersections. So you can see lines come into focus. You can turn these grid lines on your phone in your camera by going to your settings on your phone and making sure grid lines are turned on. I keep mine turned on so I can continue to think about the rule of thirds as I take photos. And this one, there's a lot of formal rules, and obeying them very strictly in taking photos can sometimes lead to overly prescribed, disingenuous looking photographs, but this one is usually helpful. And you can see the image on the left is not following the rule of thirds. The subject is right smack in the middle. It's very symmetrical, but it doesn't pull as much interest as the one on the right, where the subject is falling on these intersections of the dividers. The foreground is only the bottom third, which I like better than being halfway up the image. So definitely keep this in your pocket tools. Here's an example of the rule of thirds. You can see that the road is pulling you in, leading you to this tree. The tree is the subject, the sunset is the subject. It's falling, all the subjects are falling right on those intersections of the dividers. And these are examples taken from phone photography. And we can see that these are all following the rule of thirds. And this becomes more instinctual the more you photograph. So I especially love the one on the right where, the rainbow is pulling you down into the foreground. The foreground is the bottom third of the photograph. These lines of tomato plants are like the stakes from the tomato plants are intersectioning. The trees in the background, there's dimension. I love this photograph. I think it's excellent. Next, we'll head on to talking about symmetrical composition. So, symmetrical composition means exactly what you think it means. Just look for repetition, look for spiraling, something to create lines so that the viewers are given something to feast their eyes on. You want to create something mesmerizing. So you can see this in the left photo. We have everyone's hands spiraling in a circle. I love that. And then we have on the right the symmetrical lines from the water piping and from the seedlings, and it's entirely filling the frame, which means that there's no empty distracting space on the sides. We know exactly what we're looking at, and the lines are really drawing our eyes in to stay looking at this photo. I love it. These are more examples of the same thing, symmetrical composition. And we can see that the flowers to the left also have the rule of thirds and symmetrical composition with the top-down greenhouse line, that first third. Love that. We have a strong foreground with the flower slightly out of focus. The middle photo is great. It's filling the frame, all these watermelons. You get great circles, you get the white outlines, you get the bright pop of pink, you get the seeds, you get the striping of the watermelon rind. It's beautiful. And then to the right, we have the buckets of tomatoes, all different shades of reds and yellows, and it just looks so satisfying because it's that repetition. That repetition really, really helps. But so you'll notice that they all facing the subject head on. And the two examples to the right, these are, by the way, are taken from farms in Connecticut, these photos. And here the use of pattern just doesn't work as well because there's low light and this person is not facing the subject head on. So you really want to walk and face your subject head on. You want to walk around, face it, tell a story. This use of pattern just isn't working because they're coming from an angle to photograph this, and it just doesn't work as well. There's not a clear subject here. And you always, always, always want to have a clear subject. Always want to have a clear subject. And something to help you maintain this clear subject is filling the frame, which is what I keep talking about. Also one of those rules, I say rules loosely, that really helps all the time, I think. So it just means that you're filling the edges of your phone when you're taking a photo with positive or negative space. So that requires you to get in close and make your subject a significant portion of the final photograph. And you can use negative space or positive space to create emotion. So positive space is any part of the photo that jumps out from its surroundings. That includes your subject, for example, along with any other noteworthy areas of detail. So if you think about writing on a page, on a blank page of paper, the writing is the positive space. And then the negative space is the white paper all around the writing. So it's just the opposite. It's the parts of an image that don't attract as much attention surrounding the positive space and giving it a buffer. You can crop to help fill the frame. Just be careful about resolution. So here's an example of extreme positive space, face-on perspective, repetition, symmetrical composition, and ultimately filling the frame. Filling the frame with the tomatoes, filling the frame with the eggplants, filling the frame and a beautiful symmetrical patterned composition with these onions. An example of not filling the frame is this photograph. So unfortunately, there's no clear subject. There's a lot of things we're looking at, and it just reduces the artfulness of this photograph. So even though it's just on Instagram and we just are trying to convey information maybe, definitely use it as an opportunity to always make it artistic because that will bring people in. It will bring people in. So the subject here becomes lost. This person's trying to convey that the pick your own is open. Get it closer into the sign. Maybe don't have the cars included. The subject should be very clear. And filling the frame is really an easy way to do that. So this, again, not filling the frame, it's kind of a distracting image. They're trying to tell the story of how farmers have to go to trainings in the winter, which is a great story to tell. But how else could we show this? Maybe we're showing the notes or the agenda for the day. Just this kind of a photograph doesn't work very well because it's not very artful in terms of it's not filling the frame, and there's a distracting lack of subject. So you can also fill the frame with negative space, as in this example of a greenhouse open at night while they were making Christmas wreaths. I think this is a great example of filling the frame with negative space. The dark sky and the dark foreground totally envelop the brightly lit greenhouse. Makes a beautiful photograph. This is also filling the frame with negative space. The gray wall totally encapsulating these brightly colored flowers. Looks beautiful. And this negative space, there's nothing that we're looking at. It's like that blank piece of paper. Really making the subject, the flowers, pop. You know that they're there. You know that they're the subject. This is also positive space, so filling the frame with the leaves. The subject is very clear. It's in focus. The background's blurry in that bottom right corner. I really like this photograph. It just tells a simple story of creatures that might be living on your farm, no matter how big or small. And then another principle, not necessarily a principle, but something that you could, a feature that you could integrate into your photographs along with filling the frame with negative space, positive space. What else did we talk about? Rule of thirds, symmetry. You can use contre-jour, which means it's French for against daylight. Probably butchered that. And all that means is that it's a silhouette. You're taking a silhouette. So instead of the light being on your subject, it's backlighting your subject. So your subject is entirely dark. So it hides details, it creates a stronger contrast between light and dark, creates that silhouette and emphasizes lines and shapes, and it's a creative way to manipulate negative space. This is a great example. This is an against daylight photo, a silhouette, and this farmer took a beautiful photo with the sky as the negative space, the sunset, and then that foreground is totally just a silhouette, but it just looks so beautiful. They did a great job. But you see that the most of this photograph is just negative blue sky, negative space, blue sky. But it works. It really works. Just going over the difference between good light and bad light. Good light has both obvious direction and color and tone. For instance, golden hour, as you can see on the stock photo to the left, that's like the ultimate, golden hour, because everything is lit up with the perfect combination of shadows and depth and warm, glowing hue. It makes everyone look angelic. But you can also create interest with mist, with fog, with dew. Use the different aspects of your environment to create more interesting photographs. Just be wary of bad light, which is in the middle of the day. And this example of bad light is the photo I took on all the way to the right. There's lack of shadows, so there's not sufficient depth seen in this photograph. And then in the middle is just another picture I just took of my friends on my phone in downtown Hartford during golden hour. The sky looks beautiful. They're lit up very nicely. And you just see how the hues are much different on this photograph compared to the one all the way to the right, because there's a sufficient depth to everything we're looking at. It's not so starkly bright and starkly dark like it is on the photograph to the right. So you can also try looking for a compositional frame, so to increase the sense of depth, to lead the eye. So what I mean by this is not an actual frame on a photograph, but a compositional frame, which is a frame within what you're physically photographing, which can be a window, a door, something that frames what your subject is. I'll give you some examples. And then you want to also look for leading lines. So leading lines is like that rule of thirds picture with the tree. We saw that path that leads you in. It's just a line in the photo that leads your eyes to the subject. And leading lines can oftentimes also serve as compositional frames. And then when you're using leading lines, I just want to make the point that you want to make sure they're straight, or else you risk distraction from subject instead of pull into the subject. So when you're cropping on, especially an iPhone, I know for sure that's what I shoot with, the kind of phone I own. When you're cropping, it gives you this tool to reorient your photo to be perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical. So just make sure you're aligning it so that the line is straight. Lines are straight. And then you can use these leading lines to really create emotion. All of these tools are ways to manipulate the viewer's reaction, their emotion And that's what a good photograph does. It stirs up some sort of feeling. So the use of compositional frame in this photograph was, you can see the blurred out leading line of that ladder in the background and of the hay bale to the right of the girl. And the non-distracting background grounds us in a sense of place. And these blurred elements are our compositional frame. So you don't necessarily need to find like a window or a door, an actual structure to frame the subject. It can be what's around them. So how are you positioning yourself and the subject in the photo to create an interesting framed photo? And then leading lines. This is a great example of leading lines. You can see the line of the row draws us right up. We see who's working. We see the silo. We see the truck. It tells a story. It gives the scene a sort of cinema. And you can see very clearly what I mean by leading lines. But you can see if this image was tilted to the left or right dramatically, it wouldn't be as successful of a photograph because it would be distracting to the subject, which is the farm itself. So again, make sure those lines are straight. This is another example of leading lines, birds on a wire, compositional frame. You can see the trees that are coming from the top and the bottom and the side kind of frame the two birds on a wire. The wire is leveled off, and it's a simple photo, but it would make a good little post if you're on some sort of social media, just like birds are chirping watching us work. So everything can be used to tell a story. This is a simple moment, and still you can see our photographic principles play a part. In this example, it's a great use of leading lines with that handlebar or that gate railing shooting right down the middle. And it's a great use of depth of field, touch focus. You can see the focus is in that icicle telling the story of how cold it is out there. I would say that you can maybe even crop this a little bit more by cropping the right part of it to just make it just about the railing. But regardless, I think it's a very successful photograph. Great use of leading lines. So this is an example of the same thing, but not as successful of a photo because it's too zoomed and the resolution becomes compromised when you do that. So you need to move closer physically to your subject. That's all right. We all have successes. We all have failures, and that's why we're here, to learn. So last but not least, I'm going to go over a couple more. We're almost done with our photographic principles. Face-on perspective. You want to stand facing the scene directly. I've mentioned this before when I was showing you some past examples. So you want to stand facing the scene directly and shoot. More important to show an interesting blend of color and texture than to show an angle or depth of field. So you really need to fill the frame if you're standing on your subject face on. And you want to simplify the scene. Less is more. Look for the details, minimize chaos, tell a story. There should be no ambiguity as to what's important. So this is an example of filling the frame with positive space. It's face head on. So we saw this in previous examples, the photograph of the watermelon, of the tomatoes, of the seedlings. You want to look for repetition. So you don't want to look for an interesting angle, an interesting depth of field. You don't want to include too many distracting different things. You want it to be simple, clear, not ambiguous, and this does it well. And again, face-on perspective, giving a variety of an interesting blend of colors: red rhubarb, red strawberries, blue bachelor buttons, green rhubarb leaves, the weeds, the different textures. There's an interesting blend of color and texture, and it amplifies the shape rather than the angle or depth of field, filling the frame. Next up, macro photography is just a fancy way of saying a really intimate view of a subject. So there's no concrete, strict definition to macro photography, but I like to think about it as if you were looking at something really up close and getting to know it. So flowers are great for macro photography, insects, things that a camera could really bring out more appreciation for by its technical ability to really see. So these are two great examples. The lily on the right is very dramatic. It was edited to have deeper contrasts between light and dark, shadows. And on the left, it's just a deeper look at like the pattern in the flower. And you can see depth of field, focus is all used. The flower is in focus. All the leaves are blurred in the background. Macro photography, great tool to use. This is a macro shot as well. You can see the seedling very up close. This is a good photo. It has the rule of thirds. It's simple. There's patterns. There's balance. It is technically a macro shot. Macro shot is less of a tool, more of a know. Knowing when you're using macro photography is helpful because it makes you realize you need to really just focus on that one subject. And then, yeah, we want to use bold contrasting colors and shapes. So basic principle, just make sure you're looking for, different bright colors. And if you're not using color, say you're posting something in black and white, textures, contrasts of shadows, the light hitting things at certain angles. So your use of backgrounds here can oftentimes help. Sometimes, if there's a cool wall, a brick wall, a barn wall, paint that's chipping, something that gives the background some sort of texture, something for the viewer to really grip onto with their eyes, something that evokes some emotion. So like the clover in the right hand photo is really satisfying because it's soft and everyone knows what clover looks and feels like. Played in it when you're little and touched it, and the shininess of their boots, and then the textures of the blackberries and the strawberries and their different colors. It's very beautiful. Same with the potatoes, the different textures, the different colors, and in the middle with the flowers, all of these textures and colors. It's also beautiful. It gives the subject more prominence. And just think about that too. And you can find new and interesting angles all the time. So face on is one example, but there's 1,000 different angles you could shoot the same thing. So this is an example of shooting cows from the ground, from the grass, instead of from above or next to their heads. So get around and explore the angles of your subject to create a new and interesting photograph. And I know this presentation, you might have thought it was all going to be about the technical aspects of how to edit your photos, but I truly believe that good photography starts with the photographer really just shooting their subject with good photographic principles, with intention to create an interesting, emotive composition, rather than trying to adjust with color or all these fancy tools. And yes, all those fancy tools can definitely make a good photo a great photo, but you have to do less and take up less time and take up less space on your computer or your phone or what have you, if you start off with good principles. So when you edit, I want you to be subtle. Subtlety here is key. Over-processed photos look both unnatural, they look less beautiful to the natural eye, and they're kind of corny. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to over-edit. So avoid too much HDR, avoid spot focusing, avoid too much sharpening, avoid too many effects. Put on preset effects maybe, avoid overcropping, reducing resolution, just overcorrection in general. And what I mean by spot focus is like when there's an editing tool on Instagram where you can just put in focus like one part of a photograph, and if it's too obvious, it just looks unnatural. So avoid that. This is an example of someone who did not fill the frame, did not face the subject, over-edited in color, and you can see that it's over-edited because you can see the sky looks like a weird pinkish tan, and you can see the grass looks overly neon, and the white things in the back are bluish. It's all wrong. It's all wrong. You don't want to over-edit. But editing apps, I know I sound hypocritical, but editing apps can be useful. They are useful, and I don't use a whole bunch of them. I actually primarily use the one that's integrated on the Photos app or the one in Instagram, because I find that I don't like to over-edit my photos, but I have used Visco, the third one down. That's my favorite app to use for photo edits. That's the one that I edited to the right. It's my dad who works at a post office, and yeah, I really like that photo because it's bright and it's kind of magical, even though it's just my dad at work. And yeah, I just find that Visco has a lot of different ways to edit a photo in terms of the color hues that you can apply. You can see there's kind of a bluish golden tint that I've applied to this photograph that I could have only done in Visco. So I appreciate that. But you can still do some of these things in Instagram. I mentioned Ta.SLR for depth of field adjustment. Use your Photos app. Explore that. Just start pressing buttons. Even if you don't know what exactly you're doing, it's about fidgeting with what technology you already have. So start fidgeting with that. Snapseed is cool because you can link it up with your Google account. If you use Google, have a Gmail, and then kind of like sync your photos to your Gmail account and edit and go back and forth in that manner. Pro Camera Pro, that's recommended for Android. Again, I have a iPhone, so it's a little different. So there's a whole bunch of them. Download some, use them, get rid of them, download them again. Just try them out. Try them out. Editing comes second to a well-composed photograph. Remember that. So general quick tips to take: have some technical prowess. Read about your iPhone. Play with your iPhone or your whatever phone, your smartphone. Play with your smartphone. Secondly, find an attention-grabbing composition using some of those tips that I put out there in the world, which I'll go over in a minute. Above the ordinary, you want to be above the ordinary. Find your eye. Everyone's going to take a different photo of the same thing. Everyone has their own perspective, and you do too, and you should be able to share that with the world. So keep crafting your perspective by taking photos all the time. First camera I got, I was 9 years old, and I've been taking photos ever since, and I still have more to learn, and the only way I learn is by continuing to take photos. Find the emotion in your photo. Be emotive. Photos tell stories. Stories are interesting because they create emotions. Find emotion in your photo. That will do half the work for you. You won't have to over edit. You won't have to blast it out to a million different places. And shoot for yourself. What do you find emotive? What do you find interesting? Let the world know who you are with your photos. And so now it's time to take some photos. And at my workshop, we went out and did this assignment and then came back and worked in partners to critique and ask questions. But I'm just going to flip through the next two slides, and I just want you to press pause on the first slide and then the second slide. And here's the first one. So I want you to simply go out and try to use these skills. So take a photo using the rule of thirds. Take a photo that fills the frame. Take a photo that has repetition to create interest for symmetrical composition. Take a photo utilizing leading lines To add structure, drama, draw the eyes in. Make sure if you're using bold horizontal lines, they are straight. Take a photo of your subject face on. Here, a blend of color, texture, and shape are more important than angle or depth of field. Take a photo of your subject in a new and interesting perspective. So find a new angle, down low, high up. So now I'm going to ask you to pause and go out and do it. You could jot these down on a piece of paper and yeah, go out and try. Just explore. Take a walk around your neighborhood. Take a walk wherever. Bring your camera with you next time you do something fun. Just start taking photos and use these prompts. All right, so I'm going to stop talking about this slide. I'm going to move to the next one. So really pause now. So the next one, try taking a macro photo. Try taking a photo that has a compositional frame built into it. Think of that girl by the haystack. Take a photo that highlights bold shapes or contrasting color, or both. Take a photo in HDR mode, which is high dynamic range. And if the light is right, find something to photograph in contre-jour style, which means a silhouette. So now I'm going to let you go out and do that and rewind this webinar and pause it here and go out and take some photos and then show them to some people or post them and maybe even send me one. Let me know that you watched this. It's very cool. All right, well, thank you so much. I wish you the best of luck. This is my contact information. My words of wisdom, keep photographing your everyday. It is not about shooting the exotic. It's about seeing the opportunities all around you. Build your skills, train your eye. It doesn't matter if you're just using your phone or a fancy, expensive camera. Just go out and take some meaningful photos and keep trying. This is a photo I took on a walk around a lake. And I had this cool piece of glass that bend the light very nicely. And it's a weird, cool photo that I really like. And it's meaningful for me. And that's what makes a good photo. So I encourage you to keep trying, and please reach out with any questions. I thank you so much. And I hope you use it to celebrate your farm with the world.